Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going on an absolute biological deep dive, a truly awe-inspiring journey to figure out exactly how our bodies, and ultimately our brains, process the entire universe around us. Have you ever actually stopped to think about how a simple wave of light bouncing off an object somehow becomes the vibrant color red in your mind? Or how totally invisible molecules just floating through the air magically turn into the comforting, rich smell of your morning coffee? Well, you're in the exact right place. We are going to look under the hood at the real anatomy and the deep evolutionary history of our sensory systems.
Okay, so let's tackle this really profound question right out of the gate. How do you actually know what is real? To answer that, we have to look at the actual physical biological hardware and the neurological software that literally constructs your everyday reality. Think about it. Everything you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, it's all entirely a construct of your nervous system. Your brain is essentially locked inside a dark, completely silent bone vault inside your skull. It has no direct contact with the outside world. It only knows what's out there because of these highly specialized sensory receptors acting as real-time translators. And here's the wild part. If those biological translators change, well, your entire reality changes with them. Section 1 is all about evolving to sense reality. Now, to truly understand our sensory system, we actually have to look all the way back at its origins and ask why we even have this biological tech in the first place. Let's think about Charles Darwin's core proposition here, the idea of descent with modification. Nature absolutely does not build unbelievably complex, super energy-hungry organs like the human eye or the olfactory bulb without a really, really good reason. Living organisms aren't static, right? They're constantly being shaped. The sensory organs you and I possess today are basically the surviving, highly refined prototypes that kept our ancient ancestors alive just long enough to pass on their genes. Natural selection is the prime driver here. For instance, if an ancient ancestral tetrapod developed a tiny genetic mutation that let it detect a toxic chemical in its environment before eating it, well, that specific organism survived, while the others didn't. And over millions and millions of years, that super basic chemical detection evolved into the incredibly rich experiences we now call taste and smell. So the really crucial takeaway here is that our abilities to taste, smell, and see are not just random, happy accidents. They are highly specialized survival tools, ruthlessly shaped by natural selection. As the famous evolutionary biologist Theodosius Dobzhansky put it, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. Our sensory systems are deeply, almost ruthlessly pragmatic. We don't actually perceive the world exactly as it objectively is. We perceive the world in the highly specific, very narrow way that was most biologically useful for our ancestors' survival. Moving right along to Section 2, the chemical senses. Let's zoom in a bit and look at the actual physical hardware of our bodies, starting with how we process chemical stimuli from our environment. Our chemical senses, olfaction, which is smell, and gustation, which is taste, are deeply intertwined. They basically act as our body's primary molecular screening systems. Up in the nasal cavity, you've got the super delicate olfactory epithelium tucked way up deep inside. Odorant molecules travel up into the superior nasal concha just to meet those specific receptors. And then down below, we have the tongue. Now, a lot of people think all those little bumps on their tongue are the taste buds, but actually, scratch that, those bumps are officially called papilla. Specifically, you have valate, fungiform, and foliate papilla, and the actual microscopic taste buds are hidden deep within their crevices. Oh, and here's a really fun fact. There's another type of bump called filiform papilla. They don't have any taste buds at all. Their entire job is to act as tiny touch receptors so you can feel the physical texture of the food you're eating. How cool is that? Now, it is honestly mind-blowing to realize that tasting something salty or sour is literally just a microscopic process of tiny chemical ions entering your cells to trigger an electrical signal. Seriously, when you crunch into a salty potato chip, actual sodium ions enter your gustatory receptor cells through a tiny channel. This influx changes the cell's electrical charge in a flash, a process called depolarization. For sour foods, it's hydrogen ions kicking off that depolarization. For sweet, bitter, and umami flavors, it's a bit more complex, relying on these things called G-protein receptors to bind to the tastins and spark that electrical message. But what's absolutely fascinating from an evolutionary standpoint is our specific taste threshold. We have an incredibly low threshold for bitter compounds. It takes almost nothing for us to taste bitterness, way less than it takes to taste sweet or sour things.
Why? Because out in the wild, poisonous alkaloids are almost always bitter. So our biology comes pre-installed with a highly sensitive, hardwired alarm system to stop us from swallowing lethal toxins. It's literally a life-saving reflex disguised as a flavor preference.
Meanwhile, our sense of smell is so ruthlessly efficient that we undergo a 50% odor adaptation within the very first second of exposure. Think about that for a second. Literally 1 second. Half of the smell is just gone from your immediate awareness. You know when you walk into a bakery and the smell is totally overwhelming, but a minute later you barely notice it? That adaptation happens because our olfactory receptor cells, which, by the way, are these specialized first-order bipolar neurons with tiny, knob-shaped dendrites and hair-like cilia, they are strictly designed to detect changes in the environment. If a smell is constant, your brain decides it's probably not an immediate threat, so it just dials down the volume to save bandwidth. And another totally wild fact about olfaction is that it's uniquely directly wired into your limbic system and hypothalamus. This is the exact anatomical reason why catching just a tiny whiff of a certain perfume or a meal from your childhood can hit you with a massive tidal wave of emotional memory before you even consciously register what the smell is. It skips the middleman and goes straight to the emotion center.
All right, section 3, the brain's control center. Because once those receptors in our nose and mouth generate their electrical impulses, they desperately need a central processor to make sense of the noise. An electrical signal from a sodium ion means absolutely nothing without a biological supercomputer to interpret it and say, hey, that's salty. Deep inside the brain, you can see just how heavily fortified and complex this central processor really is. Sensory signals race up into the brain, passing through the brainstem and moving toward areas like the limbic cortex. Again, explaining why smell triggers such deep emotions. Deep inside, we have the thalamus. Think of the thalamus as the grand central relay station for almost all of our senses, routing traffic where it needs to go. Below that, forming the base, is the brainstem, which is made up of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. The brainstem doesn't just passively pass signals along either. It actively controls subconscious muscle activities and acts as a major reflex center. For example, the superior colliculi located in the midbrain handle your visual reflexes, like flinching, while the inferior colliculi relay impulses from your inner ear. Every single connection is incredibly intricately routed. Which brings us to part 4, mapping the cortex. We know the signals get into the brain, but where exactly does that raw electrical data magically become your conscious perception of reality? Let's dive right into the organization of the cerebral cortex, which is that outermost, super wrinkled region of the cerebrum. All those folds, which are called gyri, and the deep grooves known as sulci, are there to massively increase the surface area of our brain. More surface area equals way more processing power packed into the tiny space of our skulls. And what neuroscientists have mapped out is that different, highly specific patches of this cortex are strictly dedicated to interpreting very specific sensations. And this creates a constant, totally seamless, life-saving loop between perception and action. You have sensory areas that receive nerve impulses for touch, vision, sound, taste, and smell to precisely pinpoint sensations. And then you have motor areas that actually execute your response. For instance, your primary somatosensory area, which sits right behind the central sulcus, gets all the impulses for touch, pressure, vibration, temperature, and pain. It tells you exactly where on your arm a mosquito just landed. Then, literally right across that sulcus, your primary motor area fires right back, sending rapid electrical impulses down to your skeletal muscle fibers so you can swat that mosquito away. It's this continuous, real-time dialogue between sensing the world and physically interacting with it. We also have association areas, which handle the truly complex stuff like facial recognition and tying memories to what we see. It's basically like a neurological zip code system. We can clearly track the specific areas where our unique perceptions are processed. Vision is routed all the way to the very back of your head, into the occipital lobe, specifically to area 17. Meanwhile, auditory signals from your ears travel to the temporal lobe at areas 41 and 42. Your sense of taste lands in area 43, while your conscious awareness of smell registers over in area 28. It's honestly staggering to sit back and think that right now, in this exact moment as you're taking in this explainer, your area 17 is actively decoding visual shapes. Your areas 41 and 42 are translating the invisible sound waves of my voice into meaningful language, and various motor areas are silently regulating your posture. It is a literal symphony of electrical impulses, all happening simultaneously in perfectly designated microscopic zones.
Moving to section 5, when senses fail us. Because this entire system is, at the end of the day, a biological machine. And like any machine, it is susceptible to breaking down, which can alter our reality completely. When the specialized anatomy we've just been exploring gets damaged, our perception of the universe gets fundamentally restricted. Take hearing, for example. It relies on a profound chain reaction of physical vibrations turning into neurological signals. But depending on our stage of life, the delicate mechanics of our auditory system can degrade. In childhood, middle ear infections, known clinically as otitis media, are super common disruptors. In adulthood, a condition called otosclerosis can actually cause abnormal bone growth right inside the middle ear, freezing up the tiny bones that transmit sound. For the elderly, we see presbycusis, which is the natural degradation of hearing over time. And then there's tinnitus, which is particularly fascinating and frustrating. It afflicts up to 10 to 15% of people, causing a chronic ringing sound. It's a phantom perception, where the brain is essentially hearing a ringing sound that absolutely does not exist in the outside physical world. It really highlights just how much of our reality is actively constructed internally.
Now, looking back at the chemical senses, losing our olfactory capability entirely is a condition called anosmia, literally the inability to perceive smell or odor. It can be temporary or permanent, acquired later in life, or even congenital. Imagine waking up one day and your hot morning coffee is basically just hot water. A rose has zero scent. The entire world just becomes chemically muted. Because smell is so deeply tied to our orbital frontal cortex and our limbic system, which handle emotion, memory, and differentiating complex flavors, losing olfaction often severely impacts a person's overall quality of life and their ability to fully taste food. And the causes are really revealing about just how fragile this system is. Up to 50 to 70% of anosmia cases are caused by inflammatory and obstructive disorders, meaning a simple, stubborn sinus infection can completely disconnect us from the emotional and memory-evoked responses that smells usually provide, just by blocking those delicate first-order bipolar neurons and their little cilia. We also see anosmia caused by head trauma. If the sheer physical force of a head injury shears those incredibly delicate olfactory nerve bundles that pass through the porous cribriform plate in your skull, the connection is literally physically severed. On top of that, aging, neurodegenerative processes, or infective conditions can slowly degrade this pathway over time. It just proves, over and over again, that our access to reality is entirely dependent on the physical health of our biological hardware. Ultimately, understanding all of this anatomy leaves us with a really provocative realization. If we can only experience the exact chemical and physical inputs that our highly specific evolved biology allows us to, what invisible, tasteless, and silent wonders of the universe are we entirely missing right now? We already know that our primary visual area, Area 17, only sees a microscopic fraction of the total electromagnetic spectrum. We know our gustatory cells only trigger for very specific molecular shapes. Our entire perception of everyday reality is just a highly edited, evolutionarily filtered version of the actual universe, built purely to keep our primate ancestors alive. So it really makes you wonder, if we had slightly different receptors, what kind of universe would we actually be living in? Thank you so much for exploring the incredible biology of perception with me.